We're so short that I thought we should probably be up here, or you'd be looking at the tops of our heads.
I needed a ladder too.
Welcome, I'm Lisa Ellis. I'm Executive Director of Global Santa Fe. Many of you know us as the Council on International Relations. We have changed our name and rebranded earlier this year. And I think people are really connecting with our tagline, which is connecting New Mexico with the world. And we've had a number of programs recently that I have seen many of you at, and we also have some new people as well. So I do want to introduce you, if you would, just to Ambassador Marcus Guino, who's our board president, and his wife Jane. Thank you for coming. And we have board member Kareem Collins. Also, thank you for joining. Tom Johnson, I think I saw you come in. So if you want to know more about Global Santa Fe, you can talk with any of them or with our staff. We have some students here today. I'm going to tell you about our 3 pillars of the work that we do, but student engagement is one of them. And normally I talk about dialogue and diplomacy first, but I'm going to talk about student engagement. We have students from St. John's College, including our intern Kushi, who's just starting with us. And then we also have United World College students. Are you they're on that side over there? So they have come all the way from Las Vegas, New Mexico, to be with us. So the student engagement activities that we have are a fellowship program where students come and we program them all year long. We have Reagan Hill. Reagan, wave. She is handling our education program until we hire a new program officer. But we do the fellowship program for the whole year. And then we also have, it's kind of like Model UN, where we have foreign policy simulations at high schools. And then we have a Global Citizens Summit. And a summer institute for students, and we provide resources to educators. So it's one of the 3 big activities that we undertake. Dialogue and diplomacy, that's part of what this talk falls under that pillar. We believe in the exchange of ideas, and we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit, education-based organization. And we provide opportunities to discuss tough issues and hear from people who have a broad range of perspectives. And this topic, humanitarian crisis, has been a topic people have asked me for, and that students have been especially interested in. So we thought today would be an opportunity for us to really have a more intimate audience and go fairly deep into what's, I think, most often not on the television, not on the radio, when we think about what's happening in the world. I do want to talk a little bit about cultural exchange. That's our other pillar. Christian Fink in the back is our program officer for cultural exchange. We have international visitors from around the world, up to 400. The last time we had in-person visitors, we had 450 in 1 year. They come through Santa Fe from all over the world. And they study a particular theme. This is usually one stop in maybe 4 cities in a month-long tour. And we also have a program that's funded by Congress. The one I just mentioned was funded by the State Department, but we have the Congressional Fellowship Program or International Program as well. They stay in homes. So if you would like to have someone come and stay with you in your home for a week, we have a group of Serbians who are coming at the end of mid-December, right, Christian? So if you would like to host them, you can talk to Christian or call the office or go online and you can email us, because it really is an opportunity for international visitors to understand Americans better and for us to learn personally from having them in our homes. I really want to get right to Margaret. Margaret and I have to be transparent. We are friends. We work together at International Medical Corps, and that this is really special for me to have her here with us. She has been with International Medical Corps 17 years. I can't believe it. She's currently head of global initiatives. She was a former executive producer at CNN. and was a head writer at CBS with Good Morning America. She is a master storyteller, I can tell you that. She was twice nominated for the Writers Guild of America Award. And she's one of those people, she and her colleagues, who run into the crisis when everyone else is running from danger. And that's really the work of humanitarians, is that they are really heroes, and they're the first responders. And Margaret's going to tell us a lot more about that. But Margaret, before we get to you, we wanted to show a quick overview video. We're going to leave the lights on because it's short, and then a little bit later we'll show you something on Ukraine. But for now, I thought we would learn a little bit about International Medical Corps.
Each year, 250 million people are affected by natural disasters, armed conflict, and disease. I'm Sienna Miller, and I've been a global ambassador with International Medical Corps since 2009, seeing their life-saving work firsthand around the world. In such desperate times, minutes make the difference between life and death. When most others are running away, International Medical Corps rushes in. We go deep into the hardest hit and most remote areas to reach those in greatest need.
We set up mobile medical units so that we could reach the populations fleeing into the neighboring countries.
Immediately after the earthquake, we were able to visit remote areas and identify many injured cases.
Since 1984, International Medical Corps has reached tens of millions of people in over 75 countries, saving lives with a simple idea. Give local people the skills and knowledge, and that investment will pay off long after the crisis has ended.
When security was so bad we could not go to the camp, the refugees were providing their own life care to the home populations because we trained them.
Training is central to International Medical Corps work. More than 90% of our 7,000 staff around the world are local to the communities we serve.
Our staff here are all Netherlands-based people, so we know the suffering of the people here.
When I give in my knowledge to my fellow nationals, they will be able to carry that same knowledge and implement it in areas where mothers have never had before.
For years to come, they are taking care of people inside their own communities, easing suffering and saving lives. We are International Medical Corps.
That is just a snapshot of International Medical Corps, but I would love for Margaret to tell us just a little bit more about the work that you're doing and the unique approach, which includes training.
Yeah, so thank you, Lisa. And it's really just an honor to be here. I mean, I love when people are interested in our global humanity, in how we are able to serve other people, and I love that there are so many students here. You were saying, it gives you hope, and it gives me hope too, because I really feel like the students are going to be the future me's, because I won't be able to do this forever. So, but yeah, so it's interesting because that video was made a couple years ago. Our staff now is 8,000 worldwide. And again, most of them are from the countries where we work. So in Syria, where the civil war has been going on since 2011, we have hundreds of staff inside Syria who are Syrian. Our staff in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which numbers in the hundreds, is Congolese. In Ukraine, where we were working prior to the current conflict, we had about 50 staff in Mariupol, and now our staff is 300, and they're all Ukrainian. The reason this is so important is that, I mean, if you imagine a disaster coming to your community, in Santa Fe, it might be wildfires, it might be, I don't know, but it might be wildfires. And if an outside group were coming in and saying, here's what we're gonna do, you don't want them telling you what you need. You want to be the stakeholder of your own recovery. And so it's really important that we work through the communities to help deliver that relief. And so in the 30 countries where we work, from, again, Syria to Afghanistan, our staff in Afghanistan is now 500. We've been working there since 1984, which was actually our very first program was in Afghanistan. And in an ideal world, we would leave these places. We would do our work, help rehabilitate health systems, help people become self-reliant and recover, and then we would leave. But so many of the places where we work see protracted conflict, see disease, famine, natural disasters. I was speaking earlier with you about, is it Althea? Yes. About Sri Lanka and Indonesia. And Indonesia is in the ring of fire, right? So they have frequent natural disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes, typhoons. And so these are places that we frequently need to go back. And what's interesting is in many areas like Indonesia, Sri Lanka, the Philippines, where there are repeated conflicts or crises, the training that we provide then is incorporated into the local response. So I've met people who said, I took trainings with you and we used that when the next crisis happened. Because we really want to make communities resilient for the future. And you think of like Florida, which has frequent hurricanes. We now have been responding in Florida a few times over the years. So we want to help communities be resilient over the long term.
Speak a little bit about Haiti, because that's a place where International Medical Corps has gone over and over again, and it's been in the news recently. Really a sad state of affairs there. What can International Medical Corps do?
Yeah, Haiti is such a tragic situation. We didn't work in Haiti until 2010. And on January 20th of 2010, which I remember seared in my brain, a massive earthquake killed anywhere from 200 to 300,000 people. Estimates have varied over the years. And, we were able to have a team get into Haiti within 22 hours. So we didn't work in the country until that earthquake. In many areas where we work, we've been there for a very long time. But Haiti, we knew immediately that this was a massive, massive catastrophe. And we knew also that the local infrastructure was completely compromised. Many of the healthcare workers who were working there died or were injured or lost family members. So we knew that we would need to deploy a big mobilization. And we had an initial small team that I was on that went in and began kind of assessing and establishing partnerships and seeing what we could do. But we scaled up within just a couple months to 450 staff. And those were mostly outsiders. Those were mostly volunteers from Stanford, from Mass General, Harvard, from University of Miami. But over time, we started hiring local staff, Haitian workers who were going to be in charge of their own recovery. And unfortunately, about 6 months into the crisis, there was a cholera epidemic. Cholera was not endemic to Haiti, it was brand new. And the local population had never seen it. They didn't know how to treat, prepare for, and deal with cholera. It was brought in from outside workers, from outside UN workers. And so now you have a cholera epidemic. By the time that happened, we had 1,100 Haitian staff, and they led the response to cholera. They were the local water to sanitation hygiene engineers. They were the local doctors and nurses. They were the local, cleaners who were making sure that we built tents that had chlorine protocols to prevent cholera when people would come in. So it was amazing that we had an entirely Haitian staff by the time this happened. And they stayed through a cholera vaccination campaign where we vaccinated hundreds of thousands of Haitians thanks to the Gates Foundation. So these were all Haitians implementing these programs in their own communities. Today, Haiti, unfortunately, is seeing massive malnutrition, spiking malnutrition, a new cholera epidemic. And I was saying earlier that there's a lot of fatigue about Haiti. The US government and UK governments and the EU don't want to give money necessarily, and the individuals and corporations and foundations. So it's really hard for us to respond because there isn't a lot of energy and funds to respond in Haiti.
When we worked together, we were responding, International Medical Corps was responding to Ebola. And some of the questions we typically get from people are, how do you know when you should go in? And how do you know what you should be doing when you get there? And in the case of Ebola, there was treatment and training. So speak to the rationale for doing both and a little bit about that response.
Yeah, Ebola was a really, really tough decision. We had a lot of, at the highest, our CEO and all of our executives were really mulling whether we should do this. It was extremely dangerous. I remember one doctor said to me, I'd rather respond to a place where I see the threat, where it's, gunshots or bombs or a flood or a hurricane where I can see what the danger is. With a disease, you don't see it. And it was really hard for us to determine if we could respond safely, if we could do it in a way that we wouldn't put our own doctors and nurses in jeopardy, our own staff, and do it in a way that we could actually make an impact. And really, there was such desperation because cases were spreading and it was kind of unstoppable, and there were very few people and groups that could respond. Doctors Without Borders, MSF was one, and really we were the only other one. And so we began building Ebola treatment centers in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And it was really dangerous. It cost, and it was really expensive. It cost about $1 million to build one center to treat patients for a month. And so the US government stepped up. We put obviously a lot of our own money into it at the beginning, and then the US government stepped up and the UK government. But it was scary and it was politically dangerous. Doctors and nurses were being demonized. They were being criticized for putting Americans at risk for going over and then coming home. You'll remember that people were being quarantined and health departments were overseeing a doctor who came home, and I mean, I could go on and on about what they went through when they came home. But their view was, I'm a patriot. I am going overseas to fight a war and to stop that war from coming to our shores and stopping this outbreak in its tracks. And you have to stop it at the source. You can't stop it when it reaches Texas. Remember, there was a patient in Texas or London. You've got to stop it at the source. And it was a really scary time for us, but I'm really proud that we were integral to bringing the outbreak to an end.
So we talked about natural disaster in Haiti. We've talked about infectious disease in Ebola in Africa. Syria was the other crisis that took a lot of our time when we were working together. And you speak about Ebola, it's one of the things you can't see. Well, what about the mental health crisis that comes with being a refugee? living in a refugee camp from your whole life. Maybe you were born there, or maybe you went there at 5 and you were married off at 15. Just a few words about, I know we want to talk about Ukraine too, but I feel so strongly that there's been a lot of work done in some of these other places that we don't know that much about, haven't really lifted up the incredible response International Medical Corps and others were able to in multiple countries.
Yeah. Well, and Syria, you know, the civil war began in 2011, so we're now 11 years in, and you know, it's not on most people's radar. I mean, it's not really in the news anymore, but it's still going on. And, you know, at the beginning of that crisis, I mean, we didn't know how long it would be, you know, and International Medical Corps was already registered in Syria and was working in Damascus, where we were treating Iraqi refugees from the Gulf War. So we had a presence, and what was difficult with Syria is that there were people dying on both sides of the conflict. And what's tricky with Syria is that frequently in war zones, when a group goes in, they go into rebel-held areas. So they only treat the people who are dying in the rebel-held areas. And we knew that there were people dying on both sides of the war. And how do you work on both sides of the war when you're already registered according to the government on one side of the war? And without going into too much detail about how we did that, we were really the only group working on both sides of the war, and managing to keep our people safe and continue our work, which is always the challenge. I was asked earlier, you know, how do you know where to go in and whether you can go in, and are you asked? I mean, there are situations where, I think of Libya, where the government under Gaddafi was falling. So it was a transitional government. The existing government was kind of no longer valid, and Gaddafi was on his way out. It was before he was assassinated. And but we started working with the Transitional Authority and the Ministry of Health under the Transitional Authority to be able to come in and work with local, many people were fleeing themselves, local doctors and nurses, and actually working really closely with the Bedouin communities. And they have such deep ties, and frequently it was, we need transportation, and the Bedouins have all the fuel, and they were fueling our trucks for free. We would try to pay them, and they would say, no, you're saving our communities, you can come on in, and they would drive us. And you know, that community component is so important. But you know, we were going in really not with the blessing of the government. So it really depends. In Haiti, the government was in paralysis when the earthquake happened. So, you know, we were trying to coordinate with any government officials we could find, but really it was paralyzed. So it ended up being like the main hospital in Port-au-Prince coordinating with them. So it just depends. It's so many examples.
And we have so many stories Margaret could tell about just being one of the first responders. But I do want to move to Ukraine. So we're going to watch a quick video, and then you're going to tell us a little more about what you saw there, what you're doing there. So we'll draw our attention. Thank you, Reagan.
Mariupol was a modern, beautiful city. We had a lot of universities, a lot of parks, a lot of trees.
It was developing at the fastest speed city in Ukraine.
No one expected this.
I was working at home, the shelling started, the house was shaking, and we started screaming.
They were hitting schools, they were hitting hospitals, they were hitting all-person homes.
There were no electricity, no connection, no gas, no water. It also was cold because there were no heating.
You cannot escape, you just have to wait. And you do not know how long?
The Russians continued to bomb Mariupol almost continuously for 3 months.
38 days. Yeah, we spent in that basement 38 days together.
Despite all of the violence and destruction that's happened, around 2/3 of our original Mariupol team continue to work with International Medical Corps.
To resume with International Medical Corps, it was not under question.
The International Medical Corps' team in Mariupol very much represents the best of who we are as an organization.
There's huge need now in Ukraine, and we're here to help people.
Although International Medical Corps has been involved in Ukraine since 1999, our continuous operations started in 2014 in response to the Russian annexation of Crimea. Across Ukraine, International Medical Corps is providing a huge number of different services, from healthcare to mental health to gender-based violence to protection to water sanitation and hygiene, nutrition, even cash assistance. We're really trying to rebuild and recreate the healthcare system that was destroyed.
It is very important to do it together.
I'm very happy that I have my job. I have my colleagues, they support me.
I work for IMC, for International Medical Corps, and it helps me to be alive.
So we come to current day, the latest crisis. The rest of the crises that we've just spoken about continue. Haiti, Ebola continues off and on. You get a case that needs to be tamped down. And now here we are with Ukraine. And this is a very unique crisis. So Margaret, tell us, you've been there. What have you seen? What's International Medical Corps doing? What's the response been like, not just with International Medical Corps, but with the US and other communities?
Yeah. Well, working in an active conflict zone that is what we call a complex emergency, where you have multiple things going on at once. You have displaced people, you have active bombings and missile strikes, both around the country and in the areas where we're working. So we're, near our hotel, near our offices. We have a logistics hub in Kyiv. And of course, as you all know, in the last 2 weeks, there have been multiple strikes on Kyiv. Many of them have fallen near our hotel. The sirens go off constantly. When I was there, it was maybe 6 or 7 times a day. Now it's 20 times a day. And, people have to evacuate every single time because you don't know if this is the one that's going to be closed. So people are evacuating to bunkers. And a lot of our work is we're rehabilitating hospitals and healthcare facilities to put ICUs in the basement. So frequently in a hospital, an ICU is on the 3rd or 4th floor, but you can't have that in a war zone because if doctors and nurses need to evacuate, they have to leave the patients or they can't move the patients to a bunker. So we're now building ICUs in bunkers. We're supporting 122 health facilities. We've served about 3 million people in Ukraine. There are about 7 million displaced. So these are people displaced both inside the country and across the border. So we're working in a lot of the besieged areas, but also facilitating supplies and personnel getting into the areas that we can't access. But, it's like a constantly moving target. Our people are having to move around a lot, or go into what we call either suspension or hibernation mode, where we pull back to an area that's safe and then we go back in when we can. So in addition to rehabilitating facilities, we're providing clean water and sanitation. This has been a huge issue. Electricity is off in many of these areas, so you can't get clean water. So we're either providing new boreholes or wells, or we're trucking in water. We're providing food, medicines, and supplies. And, importantly, mental health. This is an area that is so frequently ignored. And I really am proud that we prioritize it on the front lines in the emergency. We are looking at mental health for people in the moment that we see them. And frequently that's kind of not factored in. We're also training frontline responders on psychological first aid because frequently what they think they're seeing in someone, you know, a mental health disorder masks itself as a physical disorder. And so we can really meet people where they are and treat them for their real suffering. Also, we're training, you know, this war could take a particularly brutal turn in terms of dirty bombs, chemical weapons. So we're training first responders on mass trauma, chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons, and how to prepare for injuries on those kinds of scales. So again, the training is a really important piece. But that's all in Ukraine, and then in Poland, we're serving refugees with livelihoods assistance, mental health assistance, and cash assistance and rehabilitation. It's a lot to do.
Yeah, lots to do. It's mind-boggling, actually. One of the recent articles or blogs that Margaret wrote, it was posted on Medium and on your website, was about ordinary refugees in an extraordinary setting and about resilience. And sometimes, I mean, just in the work at Global Sanitary, you can get caught up in how dire situations are in the world. But can you imagine working for a humanitarian organization where the news is your to-do list every day? Basically, how do you stay hopeful and speak to the resilience of these women who went from Ukraine to Poland? And I think when you hear personal stories, that's really the best way to get a beat on what's happening.
Yeah, I had profiled these three women who I met. One of them, Alona, she is probably, I think she's 22. I think she told me she was 22. She uses a wheelchair, and she was living in Ukraine on her own, independently. And she was doing work as a seamstress and embroidery and sewing. And when the war happened, her parents, who lived in another home, wanted her to leave. They didn't feel it was safe for her, that being in a wheelchair was too much of a quote-unquote handicap and put her in peril. And she didn't want to leave, she wanted to stay, and she actually started helping the war effort. She was sewing metal plates into soldiers' flak jackets. And she's one of those people who is always smiling. Even when she's telling, it's almost like a nervousness. Even when she's telling a story, she laughs and she's like, it was really scary, you know, and she'll kind of laugh because it's her defense mechanism. And she was doing this work, and increasingly it was becoming impossible for her to get around. She, you know, if she was in danger, she can't move around very easily. And finally she decided to you know, give in to her parents' wishes and leave and go to Poland. And she didn't really know anybody, and she left on her own in a wheelchair. And I mean, you know, it's so scary to leave your country against your will, period. I mean, imagine if someone said to you right now, you need to leave. And not just leave Santa Fe or leave New Mexico, but leave the United States. And you're going to go to a place where they speak a different language. It's a whole other country. And she did it and got herself to Warsaw, and through some contacts got connected with us and with a rehabilitation foundation, and they got her a new really light wheelchair. And I'm hoping we're going to hire her. She's going to do some work with young people because she's really artistic and just has a really positive attitude. But, you know, listening, you know, when I said to her, this must have been terrifying for you, and she said, Well, I felt lucky that I could leave and lucky that I had help. And she said, my mother always told me that people will help you along the way. And I get chills when I think of her because she has such an incredible strength. And, you know, she left because she had to leave and she made the best of it. And, you know, I profiled this other woman, Natalia, who was a psychiatrist in Poland and had to leave with her children. Her husband wasn't allowed to leave because he was conscripted in Ukraine, sorry. But they decided to flee to Poland, so she had to go with her 2 children alone to Poland and didn't know where they were gonna go. She found her way to Warsaw, got herself set up an apartment, and found out about an organization that we were working with and said, do you need a psychiatrist? Do you need someone to do mental health work? And so we hired her, and she's now one of our psychiatrists. And this is so frequently the case, is I meet people and I say, you know, where are you from? And they say, oh, I'm a refugee here in the camp. I work for International Medical Corps. And I love that we put people to work. And Natalia said to me, you've given me a new lease on life, because not being able to work and trying to take care of my children and my husband back home, I didn't know what I was gonna do. And she said, you're a miracle. And I love that. That really makes me feel good that, you know, I'm having, or we're having a small impact that kind of multiplies many times over.
One of the striking comparisons is refugees or people who are displaced in a place like Ukraine going to Poland, but when we talk about what happens in South Sudan or in Tigray or northern Ethiopia, I mean, these people are not moving from one urban area to another. These are people who are out in the middle of nowhere. And I know we're talking about Ukraine, and I know people will have questions about that, but how many people are displaced in the world right now? And how do you manage to tend to those that are every week roaming to a new part of a desert?
Well, it's 100 million forcibly displaced today, 100 million. We have never in the history of this world seen numbers like that, at least recorded history. So it's enormous numbers, and these are people who are both displaced across borders as well as inside their own countries. And, you know, while there are, you know, many urban refugees, most refugees are, you know, in a tented settlement by the side of the road in, I think, of Lebanon, where Syrian refugees are, you know, 10 here, 5 there, to the tune of 1 million in Lebanon. And they're not in structured settlements that have facilities and resources and camp management and that kind of thing. In many cases, it's in Somalia, you know, in the middle of the desert, where, you know, like you said, it's so hard. We want to always try to meet people where they are, but frequently it's about us trying to get, you know, for people to find us. And so frequently it is across a border, but more and more in the last 15 years, there are more internally displaced than refugees. A refugee is across country borders. And now the number of IDPs is greater than refugees. So, you know, and it's happening all over the world. And yeah, there's so many populations to try to serve, and we just do the best we can.
Margaret, I know that some of our students are going to they'll want to know, how did you pivot from being an executive producer at CNN to humanitarian work? Very different jobs. That's the first question. The second one is, have there been times where you felt your life was in danger? I mean, I can guarantee your life has probably been in danger many times, but times where you actually, I know Margaret to be fearless, but there has to be a time where you probably thought, is this really it? But, so just to answer it a little bit so our students kind of understand, how on earth does one become a humanitarian?
Yeah, Well, it was very much by accident. I would love to be able to tell young people that I had this cunning plan and I mapped it all out a la Oprah, and I saw the goal and I pursued it, and it was nothing like that. And I think I didn't know what I really wanted to do till I was doing it. And it was only in hindsight that I saw kind of the core of what I enjoy and what I'm good at, which is being a storyteller. But I was a burned out executive at CNN and left in a peak of frustration. And a woman who worked for me reached out and said, I know this great organization, they need someone to do communications and fundraising and that kind of thing. And I said, I don't know the first thing about humanitarian work. And I met with them anyway on a Monday, and then on Friday I met with the CEO and we talked for 3 hours. A woman, Nancy Ossie, who's a brilliant woman who's been running the organization for 35 years. And she hired me on the spot. And she said, I'm sure you want to think about it first, right? And I said, no, I'm ready. I'm ready. And she converted me. So I thought, I'll do it for a year. And that was 17 years ago. So, but it was really by accident. But what I realized in hindsight was that I found the thing that I was looking for and didn't even know I was looking for it, which is a more active role in humanity and work with meaning. It was really hard working in cable news. I'm sure you can all understand why. And if I were there today, I would not survive the last several years. But I'm, I love the work, and yes, there have been a few times that I said, this is it. I'm not fearless, but what the work has taught me is to fear the right things. So I'm no longer, I no longer get upset about some of the petty things that used to upset me. It's very much gives you perspective on the world. But I was in Lebanon 2 different times when bombs went off very, very near right where I was, either right before or right after. So we were going through a checkpoint and we went through, and about 5 minutes later we got a call on our radios saying, what is your location? And we told them our location back at the office, and they said, you need to evacuate from that area. There's just been a bombing at the checkpoint. A member of parliament was assassinated, and it was 5-minute difference. So same checkpoint. So that was a little scary, and in the moment you're kind of flummoxed, and later it kind of hits you that was a really close one. And I would say in Haiti, there were hundreds of aftershocks, and one morning, a week after that horrible initial earthquake, there was another one, and there were about 10 of us sleeping in the same room at about 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and we all immediately went through the door and out to the grass. But the shaking in the room and the cracks on the walls, and I remember going under a cantilever as I went out to the grass and thinking, I'm gonna die right here, like in that moment. And so there have been a couple.
I'm sure there are more, but let's open it up. Who has the microphone for our audience? Do we have a handheld mic? No, okay. So what we're going to do is just have you stand up and in your loudest voice ask Margaret a question. And I encourage our students not to be shy. So just raise your hand, or you can make a comment. Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering, since you worked in the news field and also in the humanitarian field, do you think there's a space for the medical workers that are on the ground to also become storytellers, or vice versa, if journalists on the ground can get skills in the medical field or with mental health in order to actually help people on the ground while being storytellers?
You want to just
Okay.
repeat the question a little bit?
Yeah, I just want to make sure, actually, you repeat it so I'm sure I
So
understand.
this is almost kind of an ethical question. Can storytellers or journalists who are on the ground intervene or become medical professionals, or is it appropriate for them to tend to people that they're also reporting on, and vice versa? Can the medical professionals be storytellers about what they've seen and heard? Is that about the question? Great. It's a very good question.
It's a great question, and I think particularly in medicine, it's an ethical question. Just because as a doctor, you know, there are kind of privacy issues, there are issues around being focused on your work and just doing that. I mean, a lot of doctors do. I mean, during Ebola, one of our key doctors was keeping a blog, and he ended up writing a book about his experience on the front lines of Ebola. He was at UMass Amherst, and Stephen Hatch, and you know, was a beautiful writer. So I actually, and we've had Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes as a photographer, and so, I mean, he's not a doctor, but he's, you know, he likes to also tell the story through his own photographs, and I do think there's a role for that. We do actually ask our staff to post on social media and because we do think it's important, both from transparency, but also from the power of storytelling, to recount what you've witnessed and do it from the heart. So I do think there's a role for that kind of medical humanitarian storyteller. Journalist is kind of official journalist is a little bit different. I mean, as a former journalist, I do feel there are certain kind of hard and fast rules about getting involved in the story. I do think journalists have to not advocate for groups, right? Because it's kind of like a local TV station loving the LA Rams and always going rah-rah for the LA Rams, and then a member of the LA Rams is accused of beating his girlfriend, and you know, how can they be impartial? So I don't know if that's a fair example, but I do think journalists have to be journalists and kind of can't get in the act of delivering relief. But, and I was saying this earlier to Kushi, wherever she is, that because you're a journalist doesn't mean you check your humanity at the door. And if someone is in distress and needs CPR, you should give them CPR, you know? And if someone needs help evacuating because gunfire is going off or whatever, you as a journalist should be helping them evacuate. You know, and I was saying that Clarissa Ward at CNN is to me the epitome of a humane journalist. She's the right kind of journalist, where she is helping people cross a bridge and, you know, is doing her job, but she's also being a human being, you know, in a situation of crisis. Because I don't think we stop being human beings just because we have a job to do. So.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Go ahead. How did you end up coming to talk with us at Santa Fe today?
Did you end up coming here, Margaret?
Well, my good friend Lisa, whom I love, kindly asked me. I mean, I was surprised actually, because you said, will you come and talk? And you know, I don't know, I guess I look at some of your other speakers and I say, wow, those are some heavy hitters, you know? So.
There are silent crises and there are silent heroes. Heroes you don't hear about that much. And Margaret and all of, not just International Medical Corps, all of the humanitarian workers are heroes. And all I wanted to do was have someone who modeled it really well and represent, they're just, you just don't hear about them, but they're doing amazing work. Did you have was there a question over here? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Especially in Haiti, I was wondering if you worked with Partners of Health.
I did.
How that, you know,
Yes.
how do you do that?
Absolutely. You know, it's a great question, and an important point is partnerships, working together. I think that you know, it's funny because the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the humanitarian groups, and the UN agencies and the Red Cross agencies, they respond to these crises, right? And with these big disasters like Haiti, frequently you get many responders who have never done this before. You get people who just jump on a plane and want to help, right? And those impulses are lovely, but there has to be a coordinating mechanism, because there were literally thousands of groups that responded in Haiti, including Surfers Without Borders, Clowns Without Borders. So, you know, and intentions are great, but providing humanitarian assistance is complicated. And it's complicated in a dangerous place where, you know, there were still aftershocks, where there are a lot of players, where there's little information. You don't want to duplicate efforts. You don't want to not provide what's needed. You don't want there to be large gaps. And so Partners in Health, which had worked in Haiti for many years, was already on the ground, but they also suffered, you know, losses of their own, so they needed help. And so, but they were a key partner for us and the other NGOs. They joined our efforts at the hospital. We were the lead NGO at the Port-au-Prince Hospital, the main hospital. But they were doing really important work, and they had a history there. So they have knowledge that other groups can benefit from, you know. But there were so many groups that responded that it was really important that there was a coordinating mechanism in place. And Haiti was the first time that all the NGOs and UN agencies really looked at their coordinating mechanisms hard and made some major changes that we then implemented in the Philippines and other disasters in Nepal because of the mistakes made in Haiti. Many, many mistakes.
One of the things we haven't touched on is the pandemic, and I wanted to just let people know that International Medical Corps also was a part of the response in the United States, which you typically don't do. Do you want to just speak a little bit to that? And also, have you lost healthcare workers either through the pandemic or in conflict situations? I think people don't realize just how dangerous it is.
Yeah, when the pandemic occurred, we were already kind of mapping out how we were going to incorporate it into our everyday humanitarian response overseas, including PPE for our staffs and, you know, making sure that they had masks and you know, PPE
personal
supplies.
protective equipment.
Personal protective equipment. But we recognized that the health infrastructure in the United States was really under-resourced and suffering. And we knew that we could have an impact. And we always try to go where there are gaps or where we can have impact. And fortunately, we started implementing programs here in the United States, starting with California. And then funders started to see that we were having an impact. One of the things we were able to do is deploy our roster of doctors and nurses from areas that had them available to areas that didn't, because remember, it went in a wave. So New York was hit really hard at first. And so we deployed people to some of the low-income hospitals in New York City, and then Chicago and Detroit, and Texas, and then Arizona, and then California. And then we started vaccinating. So as we were doing this, we saw more and more need and more ways that we could plug in. So to your second question about losing people, sadly, we do lose people. We recently had a staff member in South Sudan who was kidnapped. He was a doctor, and he and his driver, and we also had a member of the Ministry of Health in the van with us at the time. They were kidnapped. The Ministry of Health person survived, but our doctor was killed. you know, it does happen. It's extremely dangerous, and, you know, for the most part, our local footprint is our best protection. Our security people are local. They know what the word on the street is. They get advanced word when, you know, there's going to be activity on a remote road. You know, and for the most part, combatants know that we are healthcare. They know that we're the ones treating their wives and their children and delivering babies and vaccinating their families. So for the most part, combatants leave us alone. And our local footprint is our protection, but we have lost people, unfortunately.
Tom, did you have a question?
When an event happens somewhere in the world, and organizations like yours, but many others from multiple countries, all flow into that event, where's the command and control? Who decides who's going to do what and when?
Yeah, so essentially we have an operations division that is about the programs. And we're usually monitoring a situation, whether it's a conflict or a natural disaster, and there's a discussion among, you know, finance, operations, travel, HR, you know, a multi-dimensional kind of coming together of deciding, should we respond? Is this a crisis that needs our response? Are we able to, whether it's financially, in terms of staff, in terms of geography, in terms of deploying local knowledge, and you know, what role can we play? Usually a response in a new place involves an assessment, you know, where we go send in a small team to do an assessment first, because you don't want to just land and you can't just start working. You need to know what the needs are. So you do what's called a needs-based assessment to determine what the needs are, and, you know, how do we meet that need.
But that's within your organization.
How do you coordinate with other organizations?
Oh.
So you don't get in each other's way?
Yeah, so there is a UN cluster system. It's called the health cluster system, and it's multidimensional. So there's health, shelter, water, sanitation, hygiene, education, nutrition, protection. It has multiple multiple silos. And so all the groups are part of the UN system. We're already part of the UN system. That's why when new groups come in that aren't part of the system, it can kind of muck up the works. So, and we all meet and we start divvying up the work. You know, Oxfam, you're going to do water in this part of the country. You know, International Medical Corps, you're going to do health and medicine in this part. IRC, you're going to do refugee movements. You know, it just depends. Save the Children, you're going to do education. So, yeah.
Benedicta, you had a question.
Thank you. I'm in total awe. It is so impressive what your organization is doing.
Thank you.
I just want to know, how do you get your funding? Who pays for all of this?
Yeah, well, our annual budget is around $400 million. And each year we have to raise $400 million. So it's a mix of governments, so the US, UK, EU, Canada, Australia governments, as well as foundations like the Gates Foundation, corporations. We have about 80 major corporations from FedEx to Walmart that give us money and supplies. And then individuals, people like you who are moved and give. So it's a combination, but I would say about 50% of it is governments.
How much have you gotten for Ukraine? And in what amount of time?
Yeah, well, Ukraine was extraordinary. I mean, the outpouring was immediate and profound. I mean, the US government alone gave us about $100 million. The British government probably gave us another 20 or 30. And individuals was about 70 million from private. So this is people just going online and giving online, and social media. I mean, my God, and 60 Minutes profiled us, and after the 60 Minutes piece, we raised $5 million. So the first 100 came in the first weeks, and the 60 million private came in the first few weeks.
That's amazing. Yeah. One of our students has a question. I think we have time for just one more, maybe two, and then we need to wrap it up. I know we could talk all night with Margaret, but go ahead. And I didn't know, Mark, did you have a question, or would you? Okay. Go ahead, stand up.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. It's just, I think the short version is like how to become a humanitarian worker, or like how from like a normal person who doesn't know, like how to go into it, like how well trained do you have to be, and also like how not mentally prepared to be for it. Because especially if you're in such a field, I feel like you become so much more aware of the terrible things that are going on, and how to like stay efficient and not become inefficient by like the burden of knowing about so many sad things.
Wow, amazing question. It's like the key question. Yeah, so I think it's for people in general, it's about thinking, what am I good at, and what's that niche in the humanitarian world? Like looking back on it now, I know that, oh, I'm a storyteller. How do I, work in communications at a international NGO or a humanitarian group? If you're a lawyer, it might be going to work for an advocacy-based NGO, or one where, I think of on the border, all the groups that are providing legal services to people on the border. If you're in accounting or finance, it might be working for a humanitarian organization doing their books. The financial piece of our work is enormous. We manage about 380 grants a year in 30 different countries. That's 30 different sets of government regulations, compliance, So I think it's kind of saying, here's what I'm good at. How would that intersect with humanitarian work? If you're a journalist, it might be interviewing people, at Human Rights Watch, interviewing asylum seekers, So I think it's kind of connecting your skill set to what it might be, because every company needs those different skills, so do humanitarian organizations. The issue of the emotional piece, it's so important to think about self-care and to be very honest with yourself about why you're doing the work and how you're feeling while you're doing the work, and to be really honest with your colleagues. I think that's really important, because I think I've suffered and not recognized it and not been honest with myself, and then you pay a price. Or worse, the people you're trying to serve pay a price. You don't ever want to be a burden on people because you weren't paying attention. And so it's a really important question, yeah.
We don't have any more time, but you know what? As we step off the podium, you can grab Margaret and have another, my guess is she has another time for a few more questions, but I know some people have to be somewhere. Margaret, thank you so much for sharing with us. In programs like this, or more of them, just let us know. Or if you have a speaker that you think the community would like to hear from, or a topic, you can email us, you can send me a note. The best way to find out what's coming up is to sign up for our newsletter. So it comes out most weeks and sometimes toward the end of the week, but we list all of the programs coming up, and we have one series, Democracy Under Fire, that I think is going to be of particular interest right now, given what's going on in our world and in the world, in our world here in the United States and the world at large. So we launched that series the week of November 13th, 14th with a historian named Jeremy Surrey, who is going to give us some context. He's written a number of books. And then later that week, we have two well-known journalists, Peter Baker and his wife, Susan Glasser, who are going to speak about the global situation, but from the lens of a particular administration. It's called, their book, The Divider, the Trump Administration 2017 to 2021. And this is for those who are interested in what lessons can we pull from the past, what does democracy mean here and in other countries, and for you as students, what does it mean to be a global citizen? I think that is something my son, who's 27, is really asking himself as well. What difference does it make what happens in Ukraine? Well, if you can't get the grain from Ukraine on the boats to South Sudan, then it's going to contribute to more famine conditions, right? Or oil, look what's happening in Europe. And it's going to impact you when you go to buy gas. I think that having that broader understanding of the issues and how one thing influences the other is one of the goals and one of the activities that Global Santa Fe can do. And I think just this morning we met with the Consul General from New Zealand, who came and was interested in indigenous rights because they have a large indigenous population there. And just the idea that we could share what's happening in New Mexico and how New Zealand could share examples of how they were succeeding in terms of energy and climate issues, it was fascinating. And it just reminded me again how small the world really is, and also how important the next generation is. So students, I applaud you for coming, and to those who brought you, and we hope we see you again. We do have virtual programs too, so you can sign up and come to our events for free. Thank you very much to all of you for coming.